What is the biggest ick you had on your first date with someone? I was in my mid 40s and she was in her 30s. She was cute and fairly nice. She had quite literally the most heinous breath I have ever encountered. It was like a cloud around her. I could not think of a polite way to hand her a toothbrush and a gallon of mouthwash 10 minutes after meeting her. We were set up by a mutual acquaintance. So I just endured it, said goodbye at the earliest possible moment, and went straight for fresh air. Even my cat has committed acts of olfactory violence in the litter box that were more pleasant. I wish her well, but it was overwhelming. I'm not sure if she was unaware or had just misjudged a light predate snack of liver and garlic with onions. Either way, it was rough. Story 2, I found out after we slept together that her husband, who she said she was divorced from, kids, and in-laws, were at the restaurant she chose sitting just across from us. They had been separated for a few weeks. He did not know she was dating, and she had used the word divorced multiple times and spoke of it in the past tense. Story 3, should have listened to the ick. I had recently turned 21, was out at a bar with coworkers, and thought the lead singer of the band was attractive. Tequila gave me a burst of confidence, and I asked him to join our table. We had a great time, ended up hanging out in his car all night, driving around, listening to Nayin and holding hands, and talked for hours on the phone the next day. I thought I had hit the jackpot. For the date, he chose a chain steakhouse. I did not eat much meat at the time, so I tried to renegotiate, but he insisted it was the only option. He lived out in the middle of nowhere, and I was trying to go home with him anyway. At dinner, there was a bowl of peanuts on the table, which he absolutely demolished in 5 minutes and asked for more. He kept sweeping shells onto the floor and laughed when I stared at him, saying it is what you are supposed to do. His breath smelled strongly of peanuts the entire time. I was repulsed, so naturally, I still went home with him. I woke up around 6 in the morning and he was not there. I came out to find him cooking in the kitchen while his roommate, who I did not know, played video games. He told me the bathroom was in the basement and I could shower if I wanted, and asked if I would join them for breakfast. I went downstairs and found a basement setup with a dancing pole and strobe lights in the bathroom. They also lived in a rustic cabin in the woods. Breakfast was sloppy joes. I thought that was weird, but I got distracted by his gorgeous dog. They told me the dog was a wolf hybrid and had once dragged a deer into the house and eaten it. Then he asked if I was enjoying my sloppy dough. My stomach did not agree with any of this. I said I had to leave, but he convinced me to have a cigarette first. That was my mistake. I completely destroyed their bathroom while hearing them laughing upstairs. I do not even remember how I got out of there, just that I left with whatever dignity I had left. Peanut Guy. Story 4. The biggest ick I have gotten recently is this man who could not stop talking about other women, especially his ex-wife. He kept bringing up his intimate life, all the other dates he had been on recently, and how they were all amazing women who did not want a nice guy like him. What really made me cringe was that he called his ex-girlfriend's mom on the phone in front of me just to ask how she had been. Story 5. The date went amazingly. Drinks, back to my place, yada yada. I woke up the next morning and she was not in bed. I checked the living room and she was nowhere to be found. She had just left. Kind of weird since we actually hit it off perfectly, but whatever. I went to text her and it was green, not blue anymore. I checked Tinder. This was over 10 years ago when Tinder was it. And she had unmatched me. What the hell? My mind started racing, critiquing everything I said over drinks all the way to my performance in bed. Still confused, I went into the bathroom to pee and saw that the toilet was completely overflowing. There was sewage water everywhere and little globules floating in the bowl. The poor girl must have had an absolute explosion, clogged the toilet, and then bolted out of embarrassment, all while my drunk ace slept it off just 20 feet away. It really sucks too because she was cool as hell. We could have been laughing about this on an anniversary someday, but instead she chickened out and ran. Edit, since people keep bringing it up, there was a plunger there and she had clearly tried to fix the situation. I noticed. Story 6. The guy had absolutely zero sense of humor or ability to carry a conversation. I am not just being arrogant and thinking I am some sparkling wit that needs to be treasured. This was more like trying to get him to engage being like pulling teeth. And the few times something funny did come up in the conversation, he would get very serious and go quiet. I replayed that conversation repeatedly as well as discussed it with someone who had been eavesdropping. We were having drinks at a bar I used to work at, so a friend was keeping a discreet eye on us just in case he was a psycho because internet. And there was nothing insulting or awkward beyond normal first date awkwardness. It was just a weird hostility and a complete lack of humor, which was also completely unlike his messages where he had joked a lot. Looking back, I wonder if he was being serious in his messages and I had thought he was joking. Who knows? Anyway, I did not even make it to the meal. I told him politely that we did not seem to mesh well and should end the date. He left, but then texted me from his car saying he was crying because he thought we had a connection and that I had cruelly ended it. Bullet dodged. Story 7. I met her through my second-year apprenticeship courses. We were in the same class. I was in a rough place, just separated from my 12-year relationship with my fiancé who had cheated on me. Honestly, I probably should have been the one written about in this thread. I was behind the mask, emotionally a bit of a mess, and just there to get laid. She was already a little over the top, but as previously stated, I was not in a great place. I had just finished breaking things off with a coworker after she had caught feelings. So I met her there. I went in for a light hug and hello, and she immediately went in for a full makeout, shoving her tongue to the back of my throat. I was not into that, but I let it go. We went into the pub, sat down, ordered drinks and food, and things were fine for the first 2 minutes. Then she started going off about how she knew my coworker, and how the coworker had told her about my dong and that we had good time, and she just had to get a piece of it. She would not shut up about it, no matter how much I tried to steer the conversation away. She also got progressively more drunk. I was on drink 2 and she was on drink 5. My ex was an alcoholic, so this was a trigger point for me too. As she got drunk, she started pawing at me under the table while saying, just trying to get a feel to see if it is as big as her coworker said it was, etc. You would think desperate guy, drunk girl who clearly wants to hook up would be a match made in heaven. But no, I have never felt like such a piece of meat before. The entire thing was so off-putting. Total mood killer. It was so bad that I realized how desperate and gross I was being, and it made me stop dating and sleeping with anyone for a while until I worked on myself and got into a better place emotionally. Story 8. We talked on Tinder and met up at a local bar. He immediately put his legs around mine while I was sitting on the bar stool. I had my legs clamped together so we would not touch. He was taking shots and beers. He went into an unbelievably long spiel about how his family believed he was a messiah because he was supposed to be born paraplegic and ended up fine. I was ready to leave, so we did. He would not stop begging to go to another bar since I had picked this one. He started saying we could not drive separately because he knew I would just leave and not meet him. I gave in and compromised. Only if I could drive his car. He agreed. At the first stop sign, he asked me to be his girlfriend and demanded a reason for my no. Eventually, we got to the bar he wanted. I stood in line while he went to the bathroom. He came back and said we had to leave because too many men were looking at me. It was a blacklight bar. It was dark. We left and walked to another bar. I stayed off to the side because I had stopped drinking at the first place. A bartender complimented me and offered me a free drink. Before I could respond, my date interrupted and ordered 6 Coronas. She grabbed them, popped the tops, and told us the price. He said, no, you said it was free. I chimed in and said, for me, not for you. He paid and we went to a small table. The music was the worst EDM I have ever heard, and this man, with the worst beer breath I have ever smelled, would not stop talking super close to my face. I convinced him to leave. We got back to my Jeep, and I thought that was the end of it. It was not. He followed my car home. He sat outside my house and refused to leave, so I got in the car, I know, to try to calm things down and have a light conversation. He pulled his pants down and said, suck it. I laughed and got out. He sped off and started blowing up my phone, saying I owed him explicit pictures since I was not down for anything else. Mind you, I paid for all my own drinks all night. I blocked him and moved on. I ran into him at a party in a different city months later, and he pretended he did not know me. Thank the universe. Later that night, guess who started calling me from an unknown number? Him. So he did remember me. I got banned from Tinder twice, and I take that as a blessing in disguise. Also, his first name is Junior. Not Junior Junior, just Junior. Story 9. I have 2. 1. We worked at a seasonal haunted house job where we all spent a lot of time together for 2 months. I developed a crush on a guy, and we talked and flirted quite a bit. I was really into him and thought about him all the time. One night, he offered to walk me to my car, and I offered to drive him to his. We were talking in my car and ended up making out. He was such a sloppy kisser. He kept licking my mouth in a way I could not understand, and he left so much drool on my chin that it actually felt like it was burning. It was disgusting. It immediately killed any attraction I had, and I could not get him out of my car fast enough. I never got the attraction back either, so the rest of the season was actually pretty fun. 2. This guy picked me up to take me to lunch and removed his Invisalign in front of me, then threw it in the middle compartment of his car without a case. Mouth stuff is weird to me. Why did he not do that before the date? It affected the attraction a bit. Then, on the date, he kept staring at me with a creepy smile. When I asked, what? He would say, I'm just looking at you, still smiling. The next day, he kept messaging me all day while I was working from home, even though I told him I would be busy. He was also telling my roommate's boyfriend, who was his friend, to tell me he said hi. Our friend group had recently merged, and we all used to go out together. I warned him I might be distracted catching up with friends, and he said he understood. But that night he followed me around and had people asking about us when I barely knew him. At one point, I asked for space and locked myself in a bathroom to breathe. He started banging on the door. I told him to leave me alone, and he broke in. I snapped and told him I could not do this. He kept insisting on giving me a ride home, then asked my friend for a ride too, and started crying and acting like he might hurt himself. It felt like it was just for attention because nothing else was working. He still had his own car there. The next day, he texted asking if everything was okay between us. I told him I was not feeling it. He said he did not want anything serious anyway and just wanted casual dating. For a long time after, he made mean jokes about me in the friend group. Later, I found out he told a girl she was overweight and said, "You have to make women insecure or they get cocky. Just you." Story 10. It was probably with a girl boss type fantasist. I was in my early 30s and this was back in the day. She was intelligent and confident, but uneducated and materialistic. She just went on and on about her plans for wealth and success, none of which aligned with my definition of success. The odd part was that she seemed interested in me because she had figured out I was professionally successful, even though my social background means I am not very comfortable showing that. But she was completely uninterested in anything outside of pounds, pence, and job titles. The more time I spent with her that evening, the more unpleasant she became. Her materialism made her almost seem to transform into something ugly during the date. She had an attractive body, but the dead-eyed plastic materialism feeling was too strong. Story 11. I had a massive crush on this guy throughout high school and college. I knew his whole family because his house was where our friend group used to hang out. Eventually, he finally asked me out on a date, and since he was still living at home, I met him there so he could drive us to the restaurant. When I arrived, his mom was in the garage, so I went in to say hello. The last time I had seen her, we had talked about wolf spiders, and she was excited to show me a picture of the biggest one she'd ever seen. My crush came outside and impatiently told me to head to the car because he was starving. His mom kept talking and followed us to the car for a moment to finish her story. He told me to just close the door, then yelled at his mom to stop talking and said no one cared about spiders. Poof, all feelings immediately gone. Story 12. I went out with a guy who would technically be out of my league physically. He was ripped, six-pack and everything. I've never been into that, but I figured I would step out of my comfort zone. On the date, he told me he wanted to date someone less attractive than his ex, meaning me, so he would not get cheated on. He also said banging was required by the third date to check compatibility, then started giving me unsolicited advice about getting fit and meal plans, even though I did not ask. I was skinny/average at the time with good muscle tone. This was 10 years ago, but looking back, it gave serious manosphere vibes. Story 13. Did not even make it to the first date. I was 21 years old and went to a concert with my best friend, the bassist for the opening band, and I kept catching each other's eyes throughout the night. After their set, his band hung out off to the side of the stage, so we could still see each other. We kept exchanging smiles, flirting with our eyes, and vibing until the concert ended and he finally came over to talk to me. He seemed really down to earth and funny, just good vibes all around. So we decided to grab a drink at a bar across the street. We had been there for maybe 5 minutes when he suddenly went in to kiss me and immediately shoved his tongue down my throat. I tried to pull away, but he latched onto my bottom lip with his teeth in what felt like a literal death grip. I finally managed to yank myself free in a panic and ended up covered in blood. Around that point, the bartender noticed what was happening, asked if the guy was bothering me, saw the blood, and immediately kicked him out. Apparently, they already knew about him, and the bartender was pissed he had even been let in. Story 14. I went on a date with my roommate's manager from a sub-sandwich shop. He was a genuinely sweet guy. We had similar senses of humor, our values aligned, and the conversation flowed easily. As he talked about his family, though, I noticed that every time he mentioned his mom, he referred to her as Mother. Mother makes this excellent lasagna. Mother had to raise us on her own after a certain point. It kind of threw me off, but I had known some people from very strict religious backgrounds before, so I tried not to judge and just rolled with it. Then he mentioned that whenever he went back home to visit, she would get lonely, so it had become a habit for him to sleep in her bed and spoon her. I tried to keep my expression neutral because I did not want to seem judgmental, but then he laughed and said the awkward part was waking up the next morning and making sure she did not notice if he had morning wood. I stumbled through the rest of the conversation and eventually managed to extricate myself without agreeing to another date. I never messaged him again. A few years later, I ran into him at a different sub shop from the same franchise. I decided I was just going to keep things breezy and order my food, but the first thing he said to me was, "I have girlfriend now." Bro, you verbally capitalized girlfriend, and I was just there for a veggie on 9-grain wheat. Tell Mother she should invest in a body pillow. Story 15. We were driving around trying to pick a place to get a drink, and she kept saying, I cannot go there. We finally found a spot, but while I was in the washroom, she somehow got into a physical fight with the waitress and was thrown out. Then she sat down in the middle of a busy street and started screaming at the top of her lungs until the police showed up. They knew her by name, put one of those Hannibal Lecter-style masks on her, tossed her into the back of the van, and drove away. About a week later, she actually reached out and tried to set up a second date. Honestly, I have to commend her confidence. Story 16. I had a date with a guy I met through Match.com. I do not even know if that site is still a thing anymore. We met at an upscale sushi restaurant in Manhattan Beach, and the sunset was beautiful. We ordered drinks and sushi, and he immediately started criticizing the way I used my chopsticks. That was just the beginning. He then told me he had dated Cameron Diaz before she was famous, and followed it up with a racist comment about her appearance. I think I dropped my chopsticks onto the floor after that one. At that point, I was already trying to figure out how to leave without causing a scene. Throughout the date, he kept disappearing to the bathroom every 15 minutes and sniffing when he came back. By the third trip, there was white powder visible on one of his nostrils. I finally asked, Are you doing drugs in the bathroom? He casually replied, Yes. Want some? I probably should have walked out right then, but I was too stunned to react. I turned him down, and before we had even gotten the check, he started begging me to call him the next day because he really wanted to see me again. I ended up paying at the table myself just to speed up my escape. On the way out to the parking lot, he kept begging me to see him again and call him the next day, saying none of his other dates ever called him back. I did not respond. I just got into my car as fast as I could. Worst date of my life, and I have been on a lot of dates. It is also one of the reasons I will never try online dating again. Story 17. It was an online dating meetup at Dave & Buster's. I told him to meet me in the game room. I had just loaded $200 onto a gaming card since I usually went there with my kids. He walked over, asked if he could join my game, and then immediately started using my card. He was terrible at the games and kept dying, so he burned through credits fast. Since we were supposed to grab food afterward, I figured I would cover the games and he would pay for dinner. We played for hours, and my card was down nearly $100, mostly because of him. Afterward, we went to a buffet where you pay up front. When we got to the cashier, he looked at me and said, So, how are we going to do this? Meaning he was not even planning to pay for my $12 meal. He was not even fun to game with either. Total dude. Story 18. She smelled like alcohol when I picked her up and said she had a drink with her dad before leaving. As I drove, she kept getting progressively more drunk and even tried climbing onto me while I was driving on the highway. When we met up with my friends, she embarrassed me because she could barely stand. Then she tried opening a non-twist-off beer bottle with her teeth, cut her mouth open, and got blood everywhere. As if that was not enough, she later tried climbing over a fence at the mall so she could jump into a lagoon. All of that happened in a single night. Then, when I turned down a second date, she called me stupid. Story 19. I went on a date with a guy who already knew I was not into board games, yet somehow centered the entire evening around them and took me to a board game cafe. Every time I lost, he would make finger guns, add little sound effects, and call me a loser. He also spent more time talking to the waiter than talking to me. At one point, he said he never eats in front of someone he is attracted to, and then immediately started eating my leftovers. To make things even weirder, he had the same name as my brother and would not stop bringing it up throughout the date. Honestly, the finger guns were the biggest ick. Story 20. I met a girl on Match.com over 20 years ago, and we went to a bar and restaurant together. The date was actually going really well. Easy conversation, lots of laughs, and she looked even better than her pictures. After I paid the bill, she asked if I could drop her off at a friend's house. I said sure. I ended up pulling up to one of the sketchiest tattoo shops I had ever seen, and she suddenly asked if I wanted to go inside and get matching tattoos because the date had gone so well. I tried to politely explain that tattoos were not really my thing, but she would not let it go. Eventually, I told her I was not willing to commit to something that permanent after one date. She looked genuinely shocked, got out of the car, and I drove away. I never answered her calls after that. Story 21. He invited me over to make sushi together. We were hanging out in his room talking when he said he was going to check on the rice. A few minutes later, he came back upstairs carrying the container and started stirring the rice around with his bare fingers. Then he licked the rice off his fingers and immediately started pressing the rice into sushi molds on a tray sitting on the floor, using the same sticky fingers he had just licked. His room was already not very clean, and he was doing all of this right next to a pair of dirty shorts lying on the floor. I did not eat the sushi. I texted my friend to come pick me up as quickly as possible and told him I was not feeling well and that my friend happened to be nearby and could give me a ride home. Story 22. I met a guy through OkCupid. He told me he worked as a camp counselor, different from a child therapist, as he carefully explained. Apparently, that job had not worked out very well for him because he was also a registered S offender. To his credit, he said he wanted to be upfront about it and that he had already served his time. Then he casually mentioned that he had quit meth, but asked if I could spot him some money for drugs because he would totally pay me back next time we met. At that point, I told him I had another engagement and would call him later. Thankfully, he actually left me alone after that. Story 23. We went to a huge corn maze and I paid for her ticket. The entire time, she ignored all of my ideas about how to find the landmarks on our punch cards. Afterward, we went to Chili's Grill and Bar. At one point, I started choking on my water, and she did not even ask if I was okay. I went to the bathroom to recover, and when I came back, she was just sitting there on her phone. Eventually, she looked up, smiled, turned her phone toward me, and said, "This is the new guy I am talking to." She did not even wait for the date to end before shopping for the next one. Story 24. I went on a date with a guy to a museum. On the way there, a bee kept flying into his beard. At first, he was just aggressively swatting at it, which seemed fair enough. Then, out of nowhere, he took off running full speed down the street like he was being chased by a murderer. A minute later, he came running back and somehow the bee was still tangled in his beard. He finally smacked it to the ground, locked eyes with me, and slowly crushed it under his shoe without saying a word. Neither of us spoke after that. Story 25. He kept ordering me drinks even though I said I was done drinking. Eventually, I told the waiter I did not want any more drinks. Then he ordered more for himself, took one sip and said, "Oh my God, I forgot I'm driving. Now you have to drink this so the money does not go to waste since I'm paying." I told him no. He was actually drunk and picked me up, which scared me. I was young and naive. I asked him to walk to a nearby public area so he could sober up, and he used that time to show me his Tinder profile. This was a blind date set up by a friend. Story 26. I went on an amazing first date. So good, in fact, that we made plans to see each other again the very next day. During the second date, he suddenly started talking about how gay people were disgusting. I immediately got up, left, and told him exactly why. After that, he spent over a month texting me, asking for another chance and insisting he never said it. He absolutely did. A few months later, I was on another first date, and we started swapping bad date stories. I told him about the homophobic guy, and he suddenly went quiet before asking, "So you just left immediately?" I tried to joke and said, "Oh God, don't tell me you do not like gay people too." He then explained that he did not want to be exposed to it, thought Pride Month was wrong, and believed being gay should be kept out of the mainstream. Apparently, I am just a magnet for homophobes. Story 27. I met a girl on Tinder, and we went out for drinks at her suggestion. I picked a cool local spot, but I could tell almost immediately that she was not into it. She said she felt uncomfortable because there were not many people like us around. No big deal, so I suggested we head to a more openly queer spot instead. Once we got there, she started talking about her past heroin use and sobriety while casually drinking a beer, proudly mentioning that she had been clean for 30 days. Just as I was figuring out how to politely end the night, she looked around and said, "This place is much better. Everyone is white." That was when I realized she had meant the first place did not have enough white people around. It honestly had not even crossed my mind before she said it. I laughed awkwardly, told her she was probably going to struggle in her new majority black city, and suggested she call herself an Uber. Story 28. I went to dinner with a girl who had some mild tomboyish vibes, which honestly I was kind of looking for anyway. We were sitting at the bar, so we were right in the middle of the place, and she let out a really loud burp, clearly one of those "see, I'm one of the guys" moments, but she kept doing it every couple of minutes. What started as mildly obnoxious quickly turned into genuinely embarrassing. People in the bar were looking over every time. Eventually, even the bartender made a subtle joke about it, clearly trying to signal her to tone it down. She took it the opposite way and doubled down. I was already over it from the start, but by the end I just wanted to leave. The problem was she kept ordering another round before I could politely end things. I finally finished a drink before her, asked the bartender to split the bill, and got out. Story 29. Met this girl off Hinge to go for Korean BBQ. Once we got there, we were looking at the menu and chatting when she mentioned she was a League of Legends streamer. I acknowledged it was a pretty cool job given my own dorky background. Then she pulled out a miniature setup and started live streaming our date, telling me to say hi to the chat, casually adding that she only goes on these dates for free food. I was already taken aback by the red flags, and on top of that, I could see the raging chat comments about me. I still ordered food and went along with it. After eating, I did the classic move of going to the bathroom and leaving her with the bill. Years later, I found out through a friend that she was actually a fairly popular streamer who later got canceled for cheating on her boyfriend with one of her moderators. Still one of the worst first dates I have ever been on, but kind of hilarious in retrospect. Story 30 showed up to a first date to see a movie and parked in front of the theater. About 15 minutes before the movie started, the guy still had not shown up. I texted him and found out he had just parked and asked me to meet him by the side of the theater. I saw his car and started walking toward it, still a bit excited because he had seemed charming and funny online. As I got closer, I noticed something and slowed down. A few feet away, I realized he was completely in his birthday suit. I asked what he was doing, and he said he had no intention of seeing the movie and wanted to try something new in the car because he had never done it before. I turned around, jogged back to my car, and went home. Story 31. Coworker set me up on a date with her cousin. We met for lunch. He said he thought we should be completely honest about what we like and do not like from the start, which I agreed with in principle. Then he grabbed his phone, opened a well-known porn site, and said, "Here are some clips of how I expect you to perform in bed." I got up, went to the counter, paid my bill, and left immediately. I then told my coworker what happened. Her reaction was, "So that is why he never has a second date. It makes sense now." Story 32. I went on a date with a guy who said he was child-free, one of my requirements on the app. The date was going okay when I noticed he had a tattoo on his arm, so I asked what it was about, and he said it represented his kids. I was confused and asked why he had selected child-free on his profile if he had two children. His response was, "I haven't seen them in years, so I am basically child-free." I was stunned. When I asked for more detail, thinking there might be parental alienation or safety issues, he was completely casual about it. There were no issues. He was simply a deadbeat who chose not to see his kids or provide any support. He genuinely seemed to think that because I was child-free, I would be fine dating someone who had intentionally walked away from his family. I was so put off that I made a random excuse to leave and blocked him everywhere afterward. Story 33. I met a girl a long time ago who was incredibly well-dressed for the time. Think early 2000s London hipster style with amazing hair, and she was generally very attractive. We had a lot in common and arranged a date. I suggested a bar, but she casually told me she did not want to go there. No issue, so we went somewhere else instead. The date went very well, and afterwards we went back to my apartment to smoke a bit. She then mentioned that the reason she could not go to that bar was because she had seen her ex there with a new girl and had promptly driven her car into the bar, apparently trying to injure him. I quickly cooled things off after that. She later started showing up at places she knew I would be in the evenings and driving around to see if I was there or waiting for me. I eventually had to start going out in a different area. Becky, you were lovely, but clearly unstable. Story 34. We met at the metro station closest to my house, and he told me he had just spent the night partying with some random older man and taking pills. He seemed fine and alert, so I let it slide. I was in my early to mid-20s and a bit desperate for male attention at the time, so I let him come over. I had a small apartment in my parents' house, so I felt safe enough having him there. It was mid-afternoon on a Sunday and not an explicit hookup, and he seemed relatively normal on the bus ride over. We smoked a joint, my own stuff, I am not completely stupid, and watched Xavier, Renegade Angel, when he basically nodded off or fell asleep sitting on my couch. He kept moving like he was sleepwalking, doing strange things with his hands. He would wake up every 20 minutes or so, laugh, and tell me about what he had been dreaming about, like being a snake handler, before falling asleep again. The second time he fell asleep and woke up, I suggested he go home to sleep if he was tired. He insisted he was fine and immediately fell asleep again. He would not wake up, in the sense that he was breathing and not showing any concerning signs, just deeply and stubbornly asleep. I texted my sister-in-law who lived in the apartment upstairs to come help me. She helped me haul him off my couch and shuffle him out the door. I walked him the block to the bus stop and basically put him on the bus. I do not remember if he ever apologized, but he later sent me a message when I became Facebook official with my current husband and said he looked like Eric Wareheim from Tim and Eric, which was the show we had originally bonded over when I accepted the date request. It turns out he was in recovery for opioids. Story 35. I was 22 when I met a guy on OkCupid. He was really eloquent, into the same things as me, and super sweet. On the phone. On our first date, he showed up in a stained white t-shirt with a stretched out neck and cargo shorts that were way too big. He barely said anything during the meal and stared at the check for about 10 minutes after I said we should pay separately. I eventually just wanted to leave and said I would cover it. Then he asked if we were going to my house afterwards. It was a lunch date. Needless to say, we did not have a second date. I understand being awkward. I am very awkward myself, but he did not even do the bare minimum for a date and still expected to hit it. Story 36. I went on a date with a super handsome, tall, attractive French guy. Like, seriously stunning. I was honestly shocked he wanted to meet me. I arrived at the restaurant early, sat at our table, and ordered a drink to calm my nerves. When he walked in, I swear almost everyone turned to look at him. When the waiter came back, he ordered a drink for himself, and my drink arrived. I had ordered a double vodka cranberry. He told the waiter my order was wrong and that he would order for both of us because he knew best. He ordered a bottle of expensive red wine. I said I liked vodka cranberry and did not like red wine at all, but he ignored me, closed the menu, and insisted he knew best. I was 21 and did not know my worth, so I stayed and drank the red wine. He ordered food I did not like, mushrooms, onions, and lamb, even though I told him I disliked all of them. I ended up going to the bar, taking 2 shots, and finishing a drink. I stopped drinking the wine after that, while he kept talking non-stop. I tried to stay composed because he was very attractive, but I could not get past how annoying and misogynistic he was. He tried to kiss me. I said no thank you, and he looked shocked and said I should be lucky he would ever take a girl like me out. I laughed, walked away, and he yelled and tried to grab me. Walking ick. Story 37. I went on a blind date with a girl. She was not what I expected at all. Very short, very nerdy, and talked like Elmer Fudd. And I loved it. I'm sure she was self-conscious about it, but I thought she was cool in a girl next door sort of way. Anyways, we had a great time and were really hitting it off. I offered to drive her home and opened the door for her. She said thanks for the date and lingered, like she was waiting for something more. I smiled, said F it to myself, and gave her a small kiss on the lips. Then she slapped me, said no, ran off, and proceeded to block me on everything. To this day, I have no idea what that was about. I could not even ask her what went wrong. It was so bizarre I did not even blame myself. Edit. Also to note, there was no age discrepancy. We were the same age, 31. I just chalked it up to being shy about dating. Story 38, I was 16 and borrowed my dad's car for my first date. We saw a movie and then she wanted to go to McDonald's. She got a Big Mac and proceeded to talk and talk and talk. She had braces and was chewing and talking with her mouth open, accenting each word by waving her sandwich toward me. It has been almost 40 years, and I will never forget the sight of all the cheeseburger stuck on her braces and in her mouth as she shoved the half-eaten cheesy monstrosity in my face. Story 39. When he called his mom to ask for help and pick him up because he did not have any cash with him. I thought he was joking, but apparently it was real. His mom also paid for his Uber on the way to the restaurant, and she paid for the reservation too. His reason was his mom wanted him to live a life. To be fair, he looked good and smelled nice, but maybe he was a bit too taken care of by his mom. I hope next time Tinder classifies the mama's boys in their system because this is messed up. Story 40. This sounds made up, but I swear to God, when I got inside his apartment, he had a wall entirely covered in fedoras hanging on hooks, and another wall with at least a dozen fancy walking canes. He was not disabled. They were a fashion statement that his parents bought for him. Other red flags were marics. He joked that I should not feel obligated to sleep with him after he paid for my $3 rooibos tea. I told him I would not be sleeping with him anyway because I was on my period, and he said, "You schedule dates when you are on your period." At some point, I felt real fear in my stomach when I realized the subway would be closing soon and my phone was almost dead. I got out of there and called a cab home. When he asked for a second date, I told him no and listed everything he had done that felt creepy, and he thanked me. I think honestly he was just autistic and extremely, extremely desperate. Story 41. She brought her boyfriend to the blind date I was supposed to go on with her, planning to break up with him in front of me to prove she was single. It turned into the most awkward dinner I have ever had to sit through while they had a full yelling match. She met me there, and I had already ordered the pizza. Shout out to the guy at the pizza place who, after I walked up to buy another soda and asked, "Why did you bring this here?" realized what was happening and opened a beer for me saying, "You need this for the show more than I do." Story 42. We went for a walk around a waterfront with his 2 adorable Labradors. He was tall, handsome, and smart. Unfortunately, he spent the first half hour of our date lecturing me on his postgraduate research into the queer history of New Zealand. I must have interrupted him at one point because he turned to me and said, "Oh, I had not actually finished talking." Blah. Instant ick. I still slept with him the following week and it was fine, but I never spoke to him again. Story 43. My group of girlfriends met 2 guys outside a show after it ended. My friends all thought they were cute, so we exchanged numbers. Somehow, I was the one who ended up going on a date with one of them. I rode in the back seat while the 2 guys, yes, both were there for the date, sat up front practicing choreographed hand dances. I knew right then these guys were probably gay, maybe closeted or bi, or maybe they just thought it was funny that a group of girls assumed they were straight. The party we were going to was in another town, so I ended up riding along and then basically hanging out on my own. It was a rad underground EDM show called Wormhole in Oakland. I rode back with them and could tell the guy I was supposed to be on a date with was getting his ego hurt that I was not falling for it. I had them drop me off at home, and he tried to kiss me at my door. Instant ick. He messaged me a few weeks later, and I made an excuse not to see him again. Story 44. He asked about my hobbies. I told him I was a musician and used to be a music teacher. He went on a rant about how his mom was a pianist and he hated when she practiced because it interrupted his TV time. I asked if she was a good player, and he said, "Yeah, I guess. I do not really care." This was in the first 15 minutes, and we had not even finished the car ride to the restaurant. Nah, that definitely was not going to work. Not only did he disrespect his mom like that, but if he could not handle a piano, he was definitely not going to like a saxophone. Story 45. I met a guy downtown. It cost $5 for a train ticket. This is relevant. We went to a mom-and-pop coffee shop near the station. We met in front of the coffee shop. He was wearing a t-shirt with holes in it and dirty sweatpants. We sat down at a table and he did not order anything for himself. He did not ask if I wanted anything. It very clearly did not occur to him at all. We sat there chatting, and I was absolutely mortified that we were taking up a table in a public business like it was a park bench. The conversation went on, and I genuinely started wondering if he was trying to passive-aggressively maneuver me into being so uncomfortable that I would go up to the counter, order something, and pay for it myself, which I was determined not to do. Finally, after 45 minutes, I reached my limit, made a half-hearted polite excuse, and left. This was absolutely not a money issue. Downtown Portland has lots of parks, the world's biggest bookstore, and free days at museums, art galleries, and more. If he had been broke and suggested something free, I would have been fine with it. He was not poor, he was cheap. He was fine with me spending $5 just to get there, but could not be bothered to spend $2 on a small coffee. And that is without even mentioning the inconsiderateness and lack of social awareness in not understanding that you do not take up a table in a food service establishment for most of an hour without buying anything. Story 46. It happened in 2016. I matched with a guy online and thought he was kind and intelligent, so I went out to meet him for coffee. First off, we went to Starbucks, and right away he made fun of people collecting the stickers, calling it nonsense and stupid. I thought, okay, he's not a fan, but the way he said it was kind of rude. I brushed it off and gave him the benefit of the doubt. Then, during the conversation, he told me he was talking to several other girls and that, among everyone, he only chose to meet up with me for two reasons. First, he thought I was the prettiest and kindest looking. His words, not mine. Second, he said he worked in a company related to Google and implied he went through our online activities. He claimed mine was the cleanest and most wholesome out of all the girls he checked, basically suggesting I was the only one worthy to go out with. I thought that was creepy as hell. Then he kept instructing me who to vote for and told me I was stupid if I voted for a different candidate, which I found very controlling. It was during election season. He also told me about his ex and their mental and financial struggles. Nothing wrong with that, but I felt uncomfortable hearing such personal details on a first meeting. On top of that, he was already planning my birthday based on what he wanted to do, despite it being 9 months away at the time. Finally, he criticized my pronunciation, saying it sounded snobby for pronouncing a simple word correctly and said he preferred street kind of talk. I speak normally like any regular person. The whole date felt very uncomfortable, and I felt he was quite controlling and narcissistic throughout. He asked me again to go out the following day, but I declined. Story 47, I went on a date with a guy who didn't like anything. Do you like living here? No. Do you like your job? No. Do you have any hobbies? No. The only moment he lit up was when I mentioned I liked running and he insisted he could run a 65-minute half marathon compared to my 2-hour personal best. 65 minutes is basically Olympic level and he was clearly not athletic. Eventually I lied and said I had to get up early the next morning, so I needed to leave. He walked me to my car, tried to go for a kiss, which I dodged, and suggested I pick him up sometime and drive him to mine. I nodded, drove away, and ghosted him. Story 48. I met a guy at his house to hang out. He was the roommate of a friend, so not a stranger. He offered me cold leftover chicken wings. No thanks. I was dressed nicely, and he was in basketball shorts. He started bragging that his exes were models and that women in the adult industry told him he could be one because of his impressive body. He was a photographer. We started watching a movie, and he immediately tried to get physical. But he was talking in a baby voice. I just want to touch your booty a waddle bit. I was completely grossed out. I told him I was leaving. He threw a tantrum. I repeated myself and walked out. As I was leaving, he said, "I just want to see that booty." I said, "You can see it walking away. He later texted me in baby talk. I still shudder thinking about it. Story 49. I started going on a massive rant about how black people were intellectually inferior. Then I realized his jokes about having to be in court for offensive tweets were not jokes at all. Before that, he had already given me the ick by eating all the snacks I got for us while I went to the bathroom. But that was still one hell of an escalation. Greedy and inconsiderate to full-blown racist. Story 50, matched with a lovely guy on Tinder. We had lots of conversations over text about likes and dislikes. It turned out he had never left the small town he grew up in, and I lived in an adjacent city that he had only been to twice for Christmas shopping. We agreed to meet up on a date, and I offered to travel to his town for familiarity, but he said it was fine. We would meet in the city instead. When deciding where to go, I suggested he choose since he had not had much experience with different cuisines and I would eat almost anything. He suggested curry. I asked if he was sure since the only curry he had ever had before was from the local fish and chip shop. He said yes curry. I asked again if he was absolutely sure and he still said yes. We met up at a new place I had never been to before. It was nice and quiet, and we were one of only 2 tables there. I ordered something new as I usually do at an Indian restaurant. He ordered chicken tikka masala and egg fried rice. Mine was delicious. He looked nice too. He ate a little, looked clammy, excused himself to the toilet, then came back and picked at his food. He rearranged it on the plate, finished his water, finished the table water, and excused himself again. 2 minutes later, the overwhelming smell of vomit drifted through the restaurant. The other diners started leaving. I had finished by then, so we waited for the bill. The card machine was broken and neither of us had cash. They offered to take payment via phone to their sister restaurant, so I paid. We left, went to a cash machine, and he paid me back. He leaned in for a kiss with a bit of egg and spinach still dried on his mouth. I said no thanks. I could still smell the vomit. That was the last time we spoke, apart from him saying he forgot to mention he gets sick if he eats anything he does not really like. Story 51. Went out for trivia, and he was very obviously one of those know-it-alls who took bar trivia way too seriously, even arguing with the host about answers a few times. I was crying and made an excuse to leave early after a single glass of wine. I offered to leave cash for my drink and he declined. Later he messaged asking for a second date, and I explained I did not see it going anywhere but wished him well. He went full nice guy and demanded I pay him back for the date, saying I led him on. I had 1 glass of wine and I did offer to pay. I blocked him. He also had a mustache he kept twirling called Joints Jazz Cigarettes, and told me I was probably autistic because I was in veterinary school. Story 52. Our company was having an outing at an amusement park, Six Flags. I asked a woman from work if she would like to go with me. She said sure, but her 7-year-old daughter wanted to go too. No problem. I knew she was divorced and had a daughter, and that was fine with me. I went to pick her up on the morning of the outing, and there was another guy on her couch eating a bowl of cereal. No explanation was given for who he was or why he was there, but it was obvious he had spent the night. We went and had a good time, but I just moved on. That was too weird for me. We stayed friendly at work. Fast forward about 15 years. My wife's brother, whom I had never met and who lived in another state, came to visit with his family. They arrived while I was still at work. I got home, went inside, and sitting on my couch was the same guy. I confirmed that yes, he was that guy. He claimed he did not sleep with her. Story 53. I went on a date with the nephew of an extremely famous athlete. They share last names, so he definitely used that to his advantage. I was at a bar with friends when he messaged me, so I told him he could meet me there, thinking he would decline. To my surprise, he agreed. I actually thought that was commendable. We were smoking outside the bar when a homeless man in his 70s or 80s started acting erratically. Suddenly, he pulled out a pocket knife and demanded cigarettes. None of us really took it seriously. It felt too ridiculous. Except my date. He did not de-escalate. He escalated immediately, like he had been waiting his whole life for it. He beat the man badly. He ended up covered in blood, took his shirt off, and sat shirtless in the bar like he was proud of it. The police came, everyone gave statements, and I stick to a strict no cops ever rule. He told me to promise I would testify in court that we were scared for our lives. We were not. Later, he tried to get handsy and wanted me to go home with him. I declined. He did not like his heroism being unappreciated. Weeks later, I got multiple voicemails about court and how I did not keep my promise. I ignored them. He also had a really dumb first name. Story 54. I did not know him at all. He had asked me out when our paths crossed in a public place. I felt it took courage to do that, so I agreed to meet for coffee a week later. After picking up my coffee, I spilled some of it. He placed his hand on top of mine while I was cleaning it up. I felt very uncomfortable with my hand trapped and the unwanted physical contact. The second thing, which followed swiftly thereafter, was that he talked about watching a documentary on kissing and then started asking me about my preferences. More uncomfortable things happened after that, but I will stop here. Story 55. Went on a date with a girl who told me about a restaurant to meet her at. She arrived 30 minutes before she asked me to get there and started drinking. By the time I arrived, on time, she was hammered. She told me she was a lightweight and was slurring her words. After dinner, we were going our separate ways, and she said she would take transit home, but she was clearly too drunk to do that properly. So I offered to drive her back to her place, about 20 minutes away. She mostly slept in the car, but when we got there, she woke up and said, "Do you want to come inside and bang me?" I told her I had things to do the next day and declined. I watched to make sure she got in safely and left. I am not against a good time, but the whole thing was just so trashy, it was a massive turnoff. Story 56. Went on the first actual date with this girl I had been talking to for a bit. We made plans at the last minute, and I picked her up that night. From the moment I picked her up to when I dropped her off, she was on her phone. She barely talked to me the entire time. I think she asked me one question about myself. Anytime I tried to make conversation, she shut it down immediately. It killed all the attraction I had for her. I texted her about a week later saying I did not want to see her anymore. 3 weeks after that, I ran into her in public and she told me I texted her too much and that is why she acted like that. I had not asked. She just started explaining. It was about one message every 2 to 3 days for 3 weeks. Honestly, I was not even upset about how she acted. More than that, she tried to blame me. Why even agree to go out in the first place? Story 57. I wasn't icked out at the time because I was madly in love, but looking back, it definitely should have been a sign. When I met my long-distance, now ex-girlfriend for the first time, I had really bad eczema when I was younger. And at the time, I had a large patch on my forehead that was actively weeping serum. Any attempt to bandage it would soak through in minutes. It was really uncomfortable and I was very nervous about it. We were sitting in a hotel lobby and, in an attempt to make me feel better, she wiped her bare hand across it, got serum all over her hand, and then smeared it on the glass coffee table. It dried instantly, and there was nothing to clean it with. I was horrified and embarrassed and did not want to tell staff. She just kind of giggled while I cringed. I think I ended up using my sleeve to clean it. Not a deal breaker, but it definitely showed a lack of respect for other people. Story 58. We did not even get to the first date before I decided I wanted nothing to do with her. We met online, not on a dating site, but in a comment section. She sent me a picture of herself. You will see why I put that in quotes later. Since we had already agreed on dating, I thought it would be okay to call her pretty. She then said, "That was not me, that was my best friend," and got mad at me for calling her best friend pretty. I blocked her. I am not dealing with that level of rage baiting. Story 59. The initial meetup for a couple of drinks went fine. Then, we decided to check out a movie we both wanted to see nearby. It seemed like a good idea, except she was a movie talker. Not whispering either, full volume, and even yelling at the screen at times. People were shushing her left and right. I slowly sank lower and lower into my seat, completely embarrassed. I even debated leaving during a bathroom break. I stayed and powered through it, but it was painfully uncomfortable. Story 60. He had a dead mouse thumbtacked to the doorframe, like how people used to hang a horseshoe over a door for luck. But it was a little dead house mouse. It was actually a charming first date in the beginning. A mutual friend set us up, so he was not a random stranger. And he radiated harmless energy, so I let him take me to see some horses. He was friends with the guy who ran a barn for the local harness racing track. He took me to pet horses on our date. But then we stopped at his house and everything got weird. His sister owned the main house. She was definitely his mother, and he seemed unaware. He lived in a tiny little house in the back, like a converted shed, but bigger. When we walked in, I could tell right away the floor was wrong. Someone had laid cushion flooring directly on the ground. You could feel it. The appliances were all moved around. The stove was in the living room. Then I saw the mouse tacked over the door. Is that a dead mouse? My sister did it. I gotta go. This was fun. Take care now. Bye. I noped out of there fast. The horses were really cool though. Story 61. 35. Female. I was on a blind date set up by a family friend. He was cute and we got along pretty well with decent conversation. Out of nowhere, he said, "How this came to be is so funny, you know?" I asked why it was funny. He said the family friend came to his workplace, he worked at a bank, and begged him to meet me for coffee to give me a chance, and that my parents were desperate to marry me off because I am old and past my expiration date. I was so mortified, I just said, "Why are you telling me this? That is so rude." He kept repeating that he found it funny and got frustrated when I asked him to explain the joke. I felt vindicated when my mom and the family apologized for wasting my time. Story 62. Instead of reaching out to hold my hand, he said, "You are going to have to tell me you want me to hold your hand." when we had been sitting on a picnic blanket for about 20 minutes. Just a super passive, sheltered, spoiled dude who grew up with family money. It turned me off being told indirectly that I would need to instruct him to show interest instead of him just being straightforward. The next 3 dates were the same way, and he eventually told me he was falling for me on date 3 after I said I was not looking for something serious. Story 63, true story. When I was 18, I met a guy on a dating app. I do not remember which one, it was 10 years ago. He was a few years older and looked normal in his photos. We decided to go to a local chili restaurant. I always drove myself, but when I saw him in person, he was bigger than his photos, clearly using old ones, but that was not even the issue. He looked exactly like Bling Boy from Johnny Test. Heavy jewelry, chains, rings on almost every finger. He ordered 3 plates of chili cheese fries at once. Yes, 3 plates. He ate incredibly fast and was talking loudly about how we met online. I told him to keep it down since I was sitting right there. Afterwards, he tried to kiss me on the cheek and I backed away. He said, "I am sure you are not going to talk to me again." And I said, "Yes, I am," because I was trying to give him another chance. He was not mean, just not my type and a bit misleading from his photos. We texted a bit after that, and then it eventually faded out. Story 64. We met at a wine bar, a pretty decent one that he picked. He immediately went in for a hug, and I was like, oh, hell no. Not sure what it was, but it felt like desperation was just dripping off this guy. When the waitress came over, he asked if they had wine coolers. Now, drink what you want, of course. I am not snobby about it. Get a beer if you want a beer. But this was not 1985 when wine coolers were a thing, or even some retro revival moment. This was maybe 2005. The poor waitress just looked at him like the check-in lady in The Hangover when Zach Galifianakis asked if the hotel was pager-friendly. I do not even think she knew what he meant. Then he told me he was not technically divorced yet because he could not find his wife. He had gone to the Czech Republic to get a mail-order bride, brought her to the US, and once she got her green card, she left. So now he had to wait 6 months before he could get a divorce without her being present. Story 65. I had a date with a dentist who immediately tried to hold my hands across the table in a very romantic way. This was the first date with very little chat beforehand. It was very uncomfortable. I ended up trying to keep my hands busy by holding my drink. Another time, someone started calling me baby right out of the gate. Another guy called his ex-wife a bish and said he hated his dog during appetizers. I asked why he went on a date at all. He said his therapist told him he was ready. I canceled my dinner order and told him to let his therapist know he was sadly mistaken. Those are 3 off the top of my head. I was single for a few years and saw it all. Story 66. I was a young single mom and met a guy online who had a child the same age as mine, 2 years old at the time. When we met in person, he spent most of the date talking about how his ex was crazy for not letting him have unsupervised visitation with his son. Then he casually told me he fell asleep while his son was in a walker at 9 months old. The child fell down the stairs, suffered a brain injury, and almost died. His son is now severely disabled because of the accident. My date showed absolutely no accountability and tried to blame the whole thing on his crazy ex, even though she was not home. He then offered to babysit my child anytime because he is amazing with kids. I left as fast as I could. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.